Welcome to Gethsemane Gospel Global Broadcast. I'm your host, Pastor Tim Sykes, and we are happy today and excited about our special guest that's in the studio, the Reverend Eugene Lewis. Also, be in prayer for Pastor Donald Johnson, who had death in his family. We're praying for Pastor Johnson and his entire family, as well as the Avenue Elementary Baptist Church family. But Reverend Lewis, welcome to the Gospel Global Broadcast. I know that you have, let me ask you, you've been in law enforcement for 40 years, correct? Yes, sir. Okay. And retired, you were former Galveston ISD police chief, actually the founder, established that law enforcement agency, right? Yes. Okay. And spent about 15 years as chief of police there. I know that in many of my conferences that I attended as a police officer, they had labeled you as the father of school-based policing. Let's talk about that a little bit, because you were a former Galveston police officer as well, and you came through the Explorer program, correct? I did. How long were you with Galveston PD?
First, let me thank you for the opportunity to be on the program with you.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your service to this community and to this church.
Thank you.
I grew up here, and so I took full advantage of all the programs and opportunities that were available here. Mm-hmm. The Explorer program being one through Galveston PD. And from that, I launched out into a career in law enforcement, starting at the age of 18 with Galveston Police Department.
Okay. And so, and let me say that Pastor Lewis is also associate pastor here at Gethsemane Church. And so we're grateful to have him in the midst of us as well. Growing up here in Galveston and serving as a Galveston police officer, and then transitioning over to the GISD and establishing that program. What do you see different today as when you started out?
I think one of the things we deal with today that we didn't deal with back then, we're better connected.
Better connected?
Yes.
Okay.
Growing up, we knew people in our community, we knew people in our neighborhood, we got to know the communities and such. Now, we're kind of disconnected. We don't know our neighbors. We don't know the people that are in our community. We don't have shared values as we once did.
When you say shared values, you talking about like maybe 3 or 4 houses in the neighborhood may not be practicing Christians at all, or no church involvement whatsoever, versus us being in that neighborhood and being affiliated and practicing Christians.
I think we have to acknowledge the fact that we are a very diverse society.
Right.
And all of us don't believe as our neighbors. But I think all of us have a respect and a reverence for a God.
Right.
And so I may call my God God. Someone else may refer to him as Jehovah, mm-hmm. or Yahweh, mm-hmm. or, we all have our distinct beliefs in who our God is. So I just think that we're so into ourselves.
Right.
The Apostle Paul talked about that in
the last days, men will become lovers of their own self.
And so we're in that time now.
Wow.
We're greedy.
Right.
All we're concerned about is me.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have walked away from what made us a community.
Wow.
And that's what's hurting us now.
So that old African proverb, it takes an entire village to raise a child, really works if it's applied in the most practical way. You agree?
Yes. I mean, that's the only way for it to be successful. You got to look out for each other.
Right.
I grew up at a time when everybody in the neighborhood looked out for everybody else's kids.
Right.
And as a result of that, you didn't get away with much.
Right.
And
right.
We had a code of discipline that drew you back in when you got out of line.
Wow. Wow. I tell people all the time in this village concept, and I've said this at many churches, that the word village, VILLAGE, when you look at that word, you break it down, the V, you can say stands for the Roman numeral 5.
Yes.
There is no 5-year planning for the families and the village anymore. And then when you look at the next 3 letters, ILL, it represents ill, sickness. The village is sick. And what brings about no planning of the 5-year plan? What brings about the illness and the village being ill is those last 3 letters, AGE. There are many people that don't act their age. And so I use that concept, VILLAGE. Villages is sick and ill because nobody's has a 5-year plan, and a lot of people are not acting their age. There's a lot of immaturity, and so I want to go into this next phase of questioning we're talking about today. With all of the violence taking place on school campuses, just recently had a shooting in Nashville, Tennessee, with the young lady going, she was, I guess, transgender, went and shot into that school system. What do you think contributes, and what can we do better, or school systems do better, to prevent that? What do you think contributes to that?
I think, one of the things we have to look at is that the hands of our school officials are tied in many situations.
Okay.
In terms of what they can do and how they address discipline in schools. Violence in schools is nothing new.
Right.
And so what really has drawn and galvanized our attention to is what happened at Columbine. The Columbine was not the first school shooting.
Right.
Columbine was the first school shooting to be televised.
Okay.
All across America, we watched live what was unfolding on that campus.
Right.
And as a result of that, you see a lot of copycats coming in the aftermath. The anniversary of Columbine is coming up at the end of the month.
Wow.
And we always have to gear up for what goes on around that time.
Right.
So this is something that we're addressing. We're trying to address it with technology. One of the things I used to fight for, we can't plan security after the fact.
Right.
When we build new schools, we have to build those new schools with security in mind. A lot of times the people on the planning committees to design a school, they want the aesthetic beauty of the school. We look at floor to ceiling windows, which I fight against.
Right.
It's not safe. You're not creating a safe environment when you do that.
Right. Because the shooter in Nashville, you were saying, shot through from the outside.
That shooter approached the doors, which were locked, as they should have been.
Right.
And fired rounds through that first set of doors, and those same bullets pierced the second set of doors, breaking the glass, and you can see her walk through that door frame and into the second half and into those hallways. So
the doors were secured and locked, which would prevent people from entering normally. So when this shooter, this active shooter shot the glass out and gained interest by walking through the broken area of the glass to get into the school system.
Yes.
Wow. So in the planning of that, we talk about these schools because these are horrible events, and many things are televised, news-wise. It makes breaking news, and it saddens my heart, especially when children, anybody would lose their life in such an event. But when little children, innocent children, lives are taken as a result of active killers, active shooters, what do you think schools ought to do in the budgeting and planning process of that?
I took a lot of heat when we did what we did at Galveston Ball. We transformed a hall monitor program into a police department. We didn't do away with our hall monitors. We stepped them up to campus safety officers.
Okay.
And positioned them strategically in the hallways so that they could be a live person there monitoring what was going on throughout the campus.
Right.
The police officers were layered in on top of them to respond to acts of violence. And, one of the issues that many schools have, we call for help after something has erupted or started.
Right.
It takes time to get there. In training programs, I often talk about, do you know what the response time is going to be for your police, your fire, your EMS?
Wow.
Where you're located.
Right.
Too often we don't understand the dynamics of when you pick up the phone to dial 911. Is there going to be somebody available to respond?
Right.
We take for granted that they're there and they're going to be there and they can get there.
Right. If
That's not always the case.
it's a busy city, like Galveston's tourist town, and you may have a minimum amount, because I work with Galveston Police Department, and so if you're tied up, if you have one officer tied up on a call, another officer tied up on a call, a dispatch call comes in, especially on an active shooter, certainly you can maneuver officers away from certain calls. But you're right about the response time. You mentioned something about taking a lot of heat from transitioning that department from a regular security department into a police department, and then stepping up the public safety officers. Why do you think they gave you that kind of flat or heat?
I think, all of us want to know that our kids are safe at school.
Mm-hmm.
But we rely on people to keep them safe who are not law enforcement, who are not security minded.
Mm-hmm.
And so we look at those things and we say, well, why are we changing?
Mm-hmm.
When I went to Alvin ISD,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, you can't be in our buildings all night.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have some structure. 6 a.m. should be the earliest somebody's arriving at our campus.
Right.
10
Right.
o'clock should be the latest somebody's on our campus.
6 a.m. should be the earliest.
The earliest.
Mm-hmm.
And so at a time like that, we have people who would come in early to work, do their paperwork early in the morning. And it didn't stop until there was an incident in the Pearland district that focused on, teacher in a building by herself or alone.
Mm-hmm. And that happens a lot. So with all of that being said, let's talk about churches. Security needs for churches. Do you think churches should have armed, trained personnel within the church?
Churches like schools are soft targets.
Mm-hmm.
We're open, we're welcoming, and we want people to come in. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there are some people who have ill will.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to be prepared for that. There are a lot of churches in the Houston area that have an armed police force.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily their police force, but they have armed police officers that are in the building, around the building. And even some of the more, the bigger pastors or more prominent pastors, they have an armed security detail. They have bodyguards.
Right,
so
right.
You have to look at the times in which we live.
Right.
It used to be a time, we had a clear reverence for our people in the ministry, our pastors and priests and so on.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't exist to the extent it did in the days.
Right.
And researching crimes on church properties, there are a lot.
Right.
You would be surprised. They don't necessarily happen in the church, but they happen around the church.
Right.
So yes, we have to be prepared and to respond to whatever happens.
Right. Right. Well, people often ask me, a lot of pastor friends say, hey, Pastor Sykes, man, I know you're, retired former police officer. Sometimes you're armed, and I tell people this all the time. Yeah, I go a lot of places armed, and they say, well, man, you're a pastor, man of God. I said, yeah, I love God. I trust God. I don't trust people that don't trust God. Amen. I don't trust people that don't trust God. So with that being said, with the record number of incidents that have happened in churches across this country, I've seen it too often where people say, man, I wish we would have better plans. Well, it's too late to say that when you have tragedies and fatalities and deaths associated with a shooting, a mass shooting. The situation in South Carolina.
Yes.
where the young man comes and sits into the service, making the people think that he was a part of that. I don't know if it was a Bible study or whatever was going on at that church. And one of the first persons that he took out and killed was the pastor of that church, and then started opening fire on the other innocent. It was considered a hate crime. It took a little while for that law to brash into effect behind that situation. They should not have even had to rethink or think that thing over. It was a hate crime planned. And so what we see a lot is copycats. And just like you talked about the anniversary of Columbine coming up, and rightfully so, Columbine was not the first shooting. You remember when Charles Whitman, I think that was his name, climbed up in the tower at the University of Texas.
The Charles Whitman incident is what prompted how we police our colleges and universities to change.
Right.
Before that, we really didn't have a police presence on campuses at that time.
Right. Let me give this to one of our executives. Excuse me. So we talk about, even like they're talking now about this female transgender woman saying that, oh, first female to go on a campus, and that's not true. There was another situation where I think it was a terminated employee female went onto a college campus and shot and killed her former supervisor and killed another worker. So when you start looking at the violence all across this country associated with guns, do you think that in the United States, first of all, and then bringing it home to Texas, you think our gun laws are too lax or too, are not strong enough?
I think we have a problem with our interpretation of a citizen's right to own bear arms. I think that the need to have an assault rifle, that's a whole different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that's something we need in our home arsenals. I don't think that's something that our kids need to have access to.
The assault rifles.
The assault rifles.
Mm-hmm.
We've got enough firepower out there to start a war.
Right.
But the reality is that we also have irresponsible people getting a hold of firearms.
Right, and mentally ill people.
Mentally ill, but I look at the Santa Fe situation. They claim mental illness in the aftermath.
Right.
But before that, he planned it.
Right.
He knew exactly what he was coming there to do.
Right.
And so
how mentally ill can a person really be to engage a plan, to articulate a plan, to put a plan in place, and then to do that and then claim mental illness after the fact? Why wasn't, if they recognize the very fact that this young man was mentally ill after the fact, the question that I poll is, what was being done for treatment prior to, or did you all not recognize the mental illness before all of this took place?
I think historically we've had issues with mental illness. We don't want to acknowledge it. It casts a bad stigma on an individual. There are people who know that for themselves they need help.
Right.
But they won't go for it.
Right.
In law enforcement, we have to require our personnel to seek mental health assistance in the aftermath of some tragic event.
Right.
Whether you be directly involved or be in the periphery of it.
Well, the shooting that I was involved in Galveston back in June of 2002, of course, the police department gives you automatically 3 days administratively off. During the course of those 3 days, you're required to go and talk to a licensed police psychologist and talk about the condition and situation of the actual shooting. It was a shooting that me and 3 other officers were involved in June of 2002. And so, it weighs on you and could create an enhancement of what I call the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. But, in light of all of these things that take place, do you think that churches and pastors and religious organizations and ministries ought to have more say so as it pertains to gun rights in this country and in these states?
I think we have to be realistic about what we're up against. I think, I don't know, I grew up as a kid who went and hunted and had my own, firearm. And so how do we look at that? How do we pull back, from what we're doing now? What we're doing now is just crazy.
Right.
And I don't mean from the gunman, I'm talking about from the gunman to the legislators to the people who make the laws. We have a problem in this country. We were so fearful of our neighbors. We fail to do as Jesus has commanded us to do.
Right.
To love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And so we were lost there. And I don't know how we turn aside, but definitely assault weapons do not need to be in the hands of our young people, in the hands of those folks who are somewhat mentally unadjusted.
Right.
So we have to take a hard look at that. I don't understand why we can't just simply ban it. We grew up, you couldn't have an assault rifle, you couldn't have a machine gun.
Like police officers were the only ones that had access to a lot of that, and military.
Yes.
Well, in today's time, the assault rifles and all this, what I've recognized and realized, even all across this country and the world over, a lot of the criminals outgun police departments. You remember a situation, I think it was in California.
It's in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, where the guys were clad in heavy body armor. I think they were robbing the bank, and law enforcement were responding, and a major shootout took place where several officers lost their lives. Other surrounding agencies started coming, and these guys were in body armor. Even on their head, they had ballistic body armor and head armor. But they caused a lot of law enforcement to be killed on that day. When things like this happen, and ladies and gentlemen, those of y'all that don't know, I still refer to Reverend Lewis as chief because I had the opportunity to work for him as a campus safety officer over at the school system. And I am proud to say that on his watch, there was no major incidents of such. Am I correct?
Well,
I mean, you had some incidents, but it wasn't to heighten to that degree.
I always go back to the fact that coming from the municipal police department into the school setting, there were a lot of things that I had to adjust to. And in proposing that we initiate a law enforcement, a school-based law enforcement on campus, it was tabled.
It was tabled?
It was tabled.
When you first initiated the proposal. How long was it tabled?
By the end of that first year, we had a homicide at Central Middle School.
So you presented that before that homicide took place at Central. And that was the kid, I remember that kid so well. It took place at a bus stop, or is that
the bus pickup at the campus? This is a situation.
stabbing?
We had no security on any campuses other than Ball. And
You only had security at Ball High, but there wasn't armed security or anything like that. Just like campus monitors, hall monitors, and things like that. Now, were you employed at that time with the school system?
That was my first year.
That was your first year, but there was no campus police, and so that incident, you say, prompted an enhancement to the proposal to say, hey, this school campus and this school district needs an active police department.
In the aftermath of what happened to Derek Brown, we had an emergency school board meeting. And at that meeting, the attorney for the school district was Ed Swall. And what he advised the board was to allow me to do what it took to make sure this never happened And immediately we began to develop a police department. We began to provide training. One of the things we learned from that incident is that the staff on the scene did not know what to do. And so we began training our folks how to respond to a critical incident on campus, what was needed. This boy was stabbed at the bus loading area, walked back into the school after school to the nurse's office. The nurse had already left for the day.
The nurse had already gone for the day, and he walked back into the school.
And so we had to start talking about it. We have situations that are that critical. You call for assistance. You call 911. You get an ambulance out there. You get police out there. You know, we had this. You know, I don't want bad things happening on our campus, so therefore I won't let it get out in the public. No. Now we have laws in place that require school administrators to make the necessary calls to report incidents on their campuses. You can't hide it. You can't sweep it under the carpet.
There's still a lot of people today that really feel like, in some instances, that there's no need of presence for law enforcement on school campuses with guns and things of that nature, and in churches. When I first came to Gethsemane a little bit more than a year ago, actually coming up on 2 years, we received a letter, handwritten, in the mailbox here, front and back, on a piece of notebook page about this size, and it was satanic. It was encrypted. It had drawings, and it was a warning to the church. It had threats on there, and I immediately called Galveston Police Department to make a report. And that was one of the things that heightened my attention for us to have, some armed individuals inside the church, clandestinely, of course, in suits and tie. But because you never know when a situation will escalate from something to that degree. In seeing that all of these things are taking place in schools, churches, shopping centers, malls, the situation that happened I think it was in New York, when the gentleman planned it, and the African American community showed up, just start opening fire on random people getting out of their cars, going into the grocery store. When you hear or see about things like this, what do you think? Do you think that the federal government ought to get more involved by having funding for that?
I think right now we've got a lot of dollars that made available for schools in particular to upgrade their security, upgrade their training. In particular, working with Texas City, I know that they came in and put in a lot of electronic surveillance equipment, and it also included facial recognition. They knew who was in their buildings, and you saw a significant reduction in incidents that occurred because you couldn't do it, and get away with it. You knew who you were.
Right.
But what we're seeing right now is that people need to take the time to prepare for whatever's going to unfold.
Right.
Whether it's your place of worship, whether it's your place of business, whether it's your place for entertainment or shopping, whatever. Things can happen, and you have to be prepared for it.
Wow. Reverend Lewis, I really appreciate you being here today and shedding light on this grissom, dark place that we are in this country, with all of the violence and the things that's happening on school campuses and all across this country. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very serious topic, and we're going to be talking about it again soon. We want better. We want to do better. We want to see better, and we want to save lives. At the same time, we honor and give God all the glory. We appreciate you tuning in today. Thank you, Reverend Lewis, again, for being here and sharing about this. Myself and Reverend Lewis and a staff of individuals are going to be planning some community things. We're going to be planning some seminars and some workshops. So stay tuned for that, so that you may come and be a part of it and obtain this knowledge. Next week, our special guest will be Pastor Joyce Brooks of the Union Center African Methodist Episcopal Church, Conroe, Texas. Pastor Brooks grew up in Gethsemane. We look forward to having her on. And we appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so kindly. We'll see you next Wednesday. Those of y'all that don't know the Lord and the free pardon of your sin, we pray that you have established a relationship with him. We invite you to come tonight. The hour is 6:00 p.m. to our Gethsemane Bible study tonight at 6:00. We're praying for this nation. We're praying for this world over and everything that exists. We give all glory and honor to God. God bless you. See you next Wednesday.